Okay, we're just gonna hop right into compression. Um, so we've EQ'd the tracks at this point. I generally start with EQ because when you go to compress stuff, uh, and if you compress it before you EQ, you're gonna be bringing up all that gross frequency stuff that we just spent time cutting out. So I tend to EQ first. That way, when I compress, I can sculpt the tone in a more accurate way. So first, let's start with these guitars because that's going to be the first thing. Doubles, especially once you start compressing them, is going to tighten them up a lot. There's some performance correction I'm going to do as well on these, but we'll have another video on that. So let's just put, I'm going to use the FabFilter plugin for a good visual reference. So this auto gain feature I think is fantastic. Sometimes it's not what you want. Sometimes you want to turn this off, but this often makes it sound, it adds something to the sound. And what the auto gain feature is basically it detects the amount of compression that you're applying and then automatically adds makeup gain to match it. Or you can go manually to this wet gain and say, like, let's add 4.5 decibels of makeup gain, just in a manual across the board way. Either is, depending on the situation, you might want to do either or neither. So let's turn auto on. Let's see what that does because I have a feeling it's gonna add something to these guitars. So these styles here, clean is just what I use generally. If I'm doing vocals, I'll switch to vocal, or if it's like an effect kind of like pulsating thing, I'll use maybe punch or pumping. But clean is great. So what we're looking for here is to compress about 3 to 6 decibels, depending on the dynamic at any given second. So on the louder parts, we want the compressor to be hitting about 6 decibels or maybe 10, in that range. And then on the quieter parts, we want the compressor to either not be hitting, depending on how quiet it is, or just hitting a little bit to kind of smooth it out slightly. So just default setting, that's pretty, that sounds pretty good to me actually, just kind of out of the gate. Some settings to adjust might be this ratio, which you'll see adjusts the curve here. So once sound passes the threshold, this ratio is determining how much compression is going to happen. So if it's at 1:1, no compression's happening, even though sound is crossing this threshold. So as we increase the ratio, you'll see more compression starts to happen. It doesn't get too crazy. We'd have to turn the threshold down for that. So let's set it just at 4:1. That's just a clean compression setting. Knee is another setting to adjust. You'll see what it's doing to the curve there. It's making it sharper. So if a part is more percussive, like drums, or if this were a real staccato guitar part and more kind of not as like long notes, then something like a sharp knee might be, or a hard knee might be good to kind of catch the more heavy-handed like hits so they don't stick out as much. But for something like this where it's kind of, you can see the waveform is kind of more, it's not as dynamic as like a drum transient would be. So the knee I'm going to set just fairly soft. Not all the way soft, because then it's compressing literally everything. I'll probably actually set it to the default, which I believe is cool. 18 decibels is the default. So other settings to look at are the attack and release. Attack is how fast the compressor is going to clamp down once signal passes the threshold. So watch what happens as I increase the attack to the gain reduction. See how with the compressor's taking 250 milliseconds once signal passes the threshold to start clamping down. So if this were maybe like a synth bass part that were a real big waveform that lasted for like 15 seconds with absolutely no decay, it was just the same volume the whole time, you would start to see the compressor kick in after 250 milliseconds. But because this guitar is not that, and the signal is constantly fluctuating as to whether it's over or under the threshold, it's not even triggering. So conversely, if it's set too fast, you'll hear the compressor maybe a little too much. Again, the default is usually good for most things, just 0.25 milliseconds. Release has to do with how fast the compressor starts letting go once signal has left the threshold. So this is the default release. Look at the gain reduction line, and then watch it as I lower it. I'll lower the release. You'll see the gain reduction starts bouncing back and forth a lot quicker. Versus if I raise it all the way, it stays pretty flat because signal is constantly crossing the threshold, and it's not taking 2,500 milliseconds or 2.5 seconds. Signal's not dying down enough for that to release. So again, the default is usually pretty good, just around 209. It's pretty transparent, but sometimes you may need to adjust these depending on the part, and you can get pretty creative with it too. We won't go too much into that right now, but it's important just to learn how to use compression basically first before you start diving into crazy stuff with it. So go to the double, and we'll just apply the same plugin. And so when I'm doing this with a double, I don't want the threshold and ratio and all that to be different. I want them to be the same so that it levels out the two together better. Because if the threshold is set to a certain one on the not double on the first take, then and you set it to the same threshold on the double, if certain parts on the double are louder, they're going to get clamped down more to match the original take better, and vice versa. So typically I'll go with the original take. There's some situations in which you might start compressing the double first and get your gain reduction set for the double. But usually I just start with the original take. So let's play these both with compression now. And then this is without. And then with. So it's making it a little louder, definitely, which is making it a little harder to judge truly if it's making the sound better. But at the same time, it's also a lot. It's definitely making them more level as far as louder hits on the right are getting clamped down to be the same level essentially as the left and vice versa. So since it's making it a little louder, we'll go ahead and turn the faders down a little bit. And then we'll bring in the bass. So bass can be compressed in a very similar way. So again, we'll pull up this fab filter just for visual reference. So I'll leave the auto gain on because I want to add some oomph to the sound and not have it all be so sterile before I start adding any distortion or anything like that even. So again, just right out of the gate, this is without. This is with. We're just doing a good job of kind of balancing the entire track a little better. overheads are kind of blasting out a little bit. Let's check out this synth part. So we can see this preset the sound preset has a compressor on it. So let's see what it's doing. So it looks like it's doing some utility work, but I would bet money that this is here to add more color than anything. There's some makeup gain added. So let's add our own compressor on top of that to kind of clamp down even more. And since this is a very staccato part, as far as like the hits are very transient, we're gonna take this knee, make it hard, turn the ratio up a little bit to maybe 8 or so, maybe 10 or whatever, somewhere around there. And then usually that means you have to turn the threshold down and start seeing some compression. So right away, that's helping a lot with the upfront attack, which was what was sticking out to me. But you can see it's compressing a little too much, like of the tail end, and the release and the attack settings are making the gain reduction bounce a little too noticeably in the song. Which, don't get me wrong, sometimes these effects can be cool. I'm not trying to say don't do this kind of stuff creatively, but this is not necessarily what I was going for with trying to add some compression, and it's a little like off tempo and stuff like that. So, and it's just like inconsistent, which is the opposite of what I was trying to do with the compressor. So what I'm gonna do is use this release setting in a creative way, but based off some math. So this song is in 110 BPM. I have this site bookmarked that's basically a calculator. So we just type in 110 BPM. This is tomhess.net if you're interested. This is a great tool for delays and side chaining compression when you want them to be on tempo and stuff like that. So we typed in the BPM, hit calculate, and let's start with quarter notes, see what quarter note sounds like. So 545 milliseconds is a quarter note in 110 BPM. Let's turn 545 on the release. So that's already a lot smoother. It's helping it sit in the mix a lot better. It's gluing it in with the bass and the drums a little more. And it's adding a little bit of like oomph with this makeup gain, the auto gain feature. So, I mean, that sounds pretty good to me, honestly, right now. Let's check out this other synth that we got going on. This is a very different part. So this synth does not have nearly as much attack as that other synth does. This is more of a pad first and foremost. There's no like transient, but the sound comes to full volume, you know, several milliseconds, several hundred milliseconds into the note. So what we can do with that, I'm going to turn off the audio gain feature for this because that can get real messy sometimes with real reverberant pads like this, just so I can hear the compression more. So the swelling obviously is the vibe. Like you want this, you don't want to get rid of the swelling, but what you do want is for it not to swell up so loud, because that's going to take the listener's ear away from the mix and, you know, draw it to that specific thing in a not good way. And So what you do with the information about the attack being so long is you turn up the attack on the compressor. You'll see as the pad gets to its full volume on these longer notes, the compressor starts to kick in after a little bit. And again, you're not going for crazy amounts here. This is just a utility kind of move as far as you do this across multiple or all of your tracks in a session. And it makes the mix very smooth and is a great start to the mix along with the EQ. So let's turn the volume on that a little bit. And we'll play without compression. This is without now. And then we'll do with. So again, we're not killing the sound. We're not doing anything like that. It's just making it a little smoother. And when you start to master, this kind of stuff is going to make it a lot easier to master. Or if you have your stuff mastered by somebody, this is going to make your mastering engineer have a lot easier of a job and be able to master your song a lot better. Yeah, little compression over a lot of tracks is the much better move as opposed to a lot of compression on few tracks. Drums. These drums are not a good example because they are pretty one velocity. I mean, they sound real, but it's not quite like a real drummer might be. But I can kind of show you the concepts as far as so these are real transient hits. There's no sustain really like a that pad or anything. So what that means, I'm going to set the knee real hard, turn the ratio up a little bit. And just slightly kiss it with the compressor. Auto gain on is the default, but it might or might not be a good idea. We'll do it in this case. It's bringing up some good low end. And then we'll add the compressor to this kick out mic. Copy and paste. Kick out and kick in, just like a double. I tend to set the compressors the same so that it doesn't make the sound of the kick real disjointed for only certain hits. It keeps the total kick sound a little more cohesive since these are two mics making up one sound. So again, if this were a real drummer, this would be a little more easier to show the benefit of this because this is again just a small subtle utility move to make the overall mix not as transient, which is going to help in mastering. So snare, same kind of thing. We'll throw compressor on there, make the knee hard, turn up the ratio, and turn up the threshold so it's not compressing as much. So just like kick in, kick out, and just like guitar doubles, I will set the compressor the same as the other snare mic so that it doesn't disjoint the sound as much. Sometimes though, this does, I have a feeling this is not going to work here. But sometimes the snare bottom mic is much quieter of a signal. And so in this case, I will adjust the threshold slightly so that it matches about the same gain reduction as the snare top compressor, which is about 2.5 decibels. Yeah. Okay, great. So overheads, let's put a compressor on here. Overheads, what I tend to look for in the compression is for it to compress the snare hits, because often those are going to be the loudest hits in the overhead mics. It's crashes will definitely be very loud, like section changes or stuff like that. But usually the hi-hat and the ride and the kick drum and even the toms are not going to be as loud as the snare is in the overhead. So make the knee hard, turn up the ratio a bit, turn down the threshold. So you see how the compressor's only hitting on some kick hits in the snare. So I'm going to turn up the threshold a little bit, and that was the crash hit that went real down there. I'm going to turn up the threshold a little bit so I can try and get it only on the snares more. Like that. It's getting some kicks, that's okay. But it's really getting the snares. This will allow the snare close mics to shine through better, and it'll allow us to come and add some fun kind of pumping compression or distortion of these overheads later, possibly, if we're going that route. So again, auto gains on, just to add some oomph to the sound. But also notice how it's bringing up some like what could be grossness in the frequency, but I think it's beneficial overall. But often I'll add another EQ after I do some compression and makeup gain to sculpt the sound even more. So like those right in there. This is the EQ after the compressor on the overhead mic. So just to tighten up the sound a little bit. It's a 1.5 decibel cut, it's tiny. Again, subtle. So this is without the compressor and EQ on the overheads. And I'll turn down the volume a little bit. Just add some interest to the drums, makes them a little less sterile, and also balance. It's gonna again help with mastering that the snare is not poking out as much. Room mics are you can either leave them clean and just like a kind of a reverb sort of situation, like where you're blending it in to add like a room sound to the drums. But often people will distort the room mic or add a lot of compression. We might get into that maybe in class or in a different video. I just want to focus on utility compressing right now. So we're gonna, in this case, we're gonna compress the room similar to the overheads. Or it's just hitting the snares. Take off this auto gain on the room mic. And that's just bouncing out. It's going to make it smoother in the mix of the drums. Cool. Again, so compression and EQ can help a mix tremendously. They can help even before you start adding all the fun stuff like reverb or any kind of modulation effects or distortion, especially. When I start a mix, unless I kind of have any creative inspiration on a part or like a certain effect, this will be the first thing I do is clean up the tracks so that here, where we're at now, I can take these and start adding some creative mix choices, like maybe some distortion of the room mic, and it won't be bringing up all that gross overtone stuff that we cut out. It'll be a much cleaner signal going to the distortion.